Studios have a strange habit of pouring mountains of cash into war movies that nobody asked for. Some had big-name directors, Oscar-winning casts, and gripping true stories, yet they still crashed at the box office. Why? Sometimes it's bad marketing, sometimes it's the wrong timing, and sometimes the audience just wasn't ready for what they got. From misunderstood masterpieces to full-blown production disasters, we're counting down 13 great war films that flopped hard, and the surprising reasons why. Wind Talkers 2012. It had all the makings of a surefire hit. John Woo, the action maestro behind Face Off and Mission Impossible 2, was telling the untold story of the Navajo Code Talkers, the real-life W-2 Marines who use their native language to transmit unbreakable codes on the battlefield. Nicolas Cage was front and center, backed by Adam Beach and Christian Slater. It should have been a gripping war epic. Instead, it's remembered for slow-motion explosions, stock hero shots, and Cage doing his trademark wide-eyed thousand-yard stare. Woo wanted to make a film about friendship, redemption, and the toll of war on the human spirit. The studio, they wanted a loud, patriotic crowd pleaser. The two visions collided. What could have been a heartfelt tribute got buried under cliches, over-choreographed gunfights, and Hollywood melodrama. Critics pounced on the formulaic plot, and audiences, expecting something deeper, stayed away. The numbers were brutal. With a production budget around $115 million, Wind Talkers scraped together just over $77 million worldwide. That's not just missing the mark, that's sinking the whole target ship. And yet, it holds a strange place in war movie history. The only major Hollywood film to focus directly on the Navajo Code Talkers. Flawed? Absolutely. But in between the explosions, you catch glimpses of a better, braver film fighting to break through. Unfortunately, that battle was lost long before it hit theaters. Operation Finale 2018. On paper, this should have been a gripping, awards-friendly hit. Oscar Isaac, Ben Kingsley, Melanie Laurent. A true story with sky-high stakes. Operation Finale dramatizes the Mossad mission to track down and capture Adolf Eichmann, one of the key architects of the Holocaust, who was hiding in Argentina under a false identity. It had the pedigree, the intrigue, and the talent. So why did it barely register at the box office? Part of the problem was tone. The real mission was tense, delicate, and morally weighty. The film, however, played with a slick, almost heist movie vibe, all stylish lighting, tense standoffs, and polished dialogue. That glossy treatment didn't always mesh with the dark reality of its subject. Critics were split. Some praised Isaac's magnetic performance and the gripping final act, while others felt it didn't dig deep enough into the moral complexities. Financially, it stumbled. With a $24 million budget, it only pulled in about $17 million worldwide. That's not catastrophic for a small drama, but for a prestige historical thriller with a strong cast, it's still a disappointment. Which is a shame because when Operation Finale works, it really works, especially in the quiet, psychological duels between Isaac and Kingsley. It's one of the few modern films to even touch this historical chapter, and in that sense, it deserves more recognition than it got. Sometimes the box office just isn't a fair judge. War Dogs 2016. Todd Phillips was riding high after The Hangover and gearing up for a future Oscar run with Joker, but in between, he took a sharp turn into real-life war profiteering with War Dogs. The story came from a Rolling Stone article about two Miami 20-somethings, David Packouz and Ephraim Diveroli, who found a loophole in the U.S. military's procurement system and scored a $300 million contract to supply arms for the war in Afghanistan. On screen, Jonah Hill went full unhinged charm as Diveroli, while Miles Teller played Packouz as the reluctant partner. The tone was a mix of Wolf of Wall Street swagger and Warzone grit, showing both the absurdity and danger of their hustle. Phillips didn't shy away from pointing fingers at the broken system that let these guys operate and profit in the first place. Critics were split. Some loved the mix of dark comedy and moral rot. Others thought it was too slick for its own good. But financially, it wasn't the win Warner Brothers had hoped for. With a $50 million production budget and heavy marketing costs, the film's $86 million worldwide gross meant it barely limped into the black, and that's being generous. In Hollywood math, that's a flop. Still, War Dogs stands out for pulling the curtain back on a real-life wartime grift and making it entertaining without glamorizing it too much. Hotel Rwanda documentary. Some war films leave you shaken for days. Hotel Rwanda is one of them. Directed by Terry George and starring Don Cheadle in a career-defining role, it tells the true story of Paul Rusesabagina, a hotel manager who sheltered over 1,200 refugees during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. It's harrowing, tense, and full of moments that make you question how such atrocities can happen in modern times. Critics were nearly unanimous in their praise. When it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, it drew standing ovations and was compared to Schindler's List. Cheadle earned an Oscar nomination, Sophie Okonedo broke out as his on-screen wife, and the film became a classroom staple for discussions about human rights and global inaction. So why is it on this list? Because despite the critical acclaim and awards buzz, Hotel Rwanda barely made an impact financially. With a modest budget of about $17 million, it grossed around $38 million worldwide. In Hollywood terms, that's underperforming, especially for a film being hailed as one of the most important of its time. Over the years, it's been the subject of controversy as differing accounts of Rusesabagina's actions emerged, but its impact as a piece of cinema remains strong. It's a prime example of a great war movie whose box office numbers didn't match its cultural influence. Jarhead 2005. When people bought tickets to a Gulf War movie starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Jamie Foxx, and Peter Sarsgaard, they expected intense combat scenes and battlefield heroics. What they got instead was boredom. That's not an insult. That's the point of Jarhead. Directed by Sam Mendes and based on Anthony Swofford's memoir, it's about the long, grinding psychological strain of training for a war that never comes. The film's first act plays like a traditional boot camp drama, screaming drill sergeants, grueling exercises, and camaraderie forged under pressure. But once deployed, the Marines find themselves stuck in the desert, waiting for action that never arrives. The enemy is distant, the heat is crushing, and the soldiers are left to stew in frustration, paranoia, and boredom. It's a bold, unglamorous take on military life. That honesty confused a lot of audiences in 2005. The marketing sold Jarhead as a high-octane war film, so when the firefights didn't come, ticket buyers felt shortchanged. Reviews were mixed, and while it made $97 million worldwide on a $72 million budget, marketing and distribution costs pushed it into flop territory. Today, though, it's been reappraised as one of the most realistic portrayals of modern soldiering. Sometimes the most accurate war movies are the ones that refuse to give you what you expect. G.I. Jane, 1997. By the late 90s, Ridley Scott was still a respected name, and Demi Moore was one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood. G.I. Jane looked like it would be a surefire box office hit. Moore plays Jordan O'Neill, a fictional female Navy SEAL trainee put through the most brutal physical and mental tests the military has to offer. The hook was obvious. One woman versus an entrenched male system, all grit, no compromise. Moore threw herself into the role. She insisted on going through real Navy SEAL training, shaved her head on camera, and pushed herself physically to the limit. Critics actually praised her dedication, calling it one of her strongest performances. But somewhere along the way, the marketing and the film's execution missed the target audience. The trailers promised an empowering, adrenaline-pumping action movie. What they got was part military procedural, part political drama, and part personal journey, a mix that confused audiences. The result? A $50 million production that only grossed $48 million worldwide in theaters. In Hollywood math, that's not just a loss, it's a career crater. The film's failure unfairly landed on Moore's shoulders, damaging her bankability. Screenwriter Danielle Alexandra never wrote another movie again, and even Ridley Scott distanced himself from the theatrical cut. Ironically, the movie found a second life in home video sales and cable reruns, earning cult status among fans who admire its grit. But in theaters, G.I. Jane never got the respect its lead earned. Kingdom of Heaven 2005. Epic, expensive, and for American audiences in 2005, a total head-scratcher. Kingdom of Heaven had Ridley Scott directing, Orlando Bloom hot off The Lord of the Rings, and a cast stacked with Liam Neeson, Eva Green, and Jeremy Irons. The story, the Crusades, political intrigue, and massive medieval battles. On paper, it should have been a spiritual cousin to Gladiator. But the studio's decision-making sent it into box office purgatory. Scott delivered a 194-minute historical epic exploring religious conflict, moral dilemmas, and the messy politics of the Middle East during the 12th century. Fox executives panicked, fearing no one would sit through a 3-hour war drama, so they chopped nearly 50 minutes out. What hit theaters was visually stunning but narratively hollow. Critics noted gaping plot holes, and audiences were left wondering why certain storylines made no sense. In the US, it made just $47 million against a production budget of around $130 million. Internationally, it fared better, particularly in Europe and the Middle East, where its historical setting resonated, but the domestic flop overshadowed its global earnings. Years later, Scott released the director's cut, and suddenly, the film was being hailed as one of his best works. But in 2005, Kingdom of Heaven was just another expensive war epic that died in its first battle. The Thin Red Line, 1998. Terrence Malick doesn't make films often, and when he does, they're usually the cinematic equivalent of poetry. The Thin Red Line was his only war film, adapted from James Jones's novel about the Battle of Guadalcanal during World War II. With a cast that read like an awards night seating chart, Sean Penn, George Clooney, John Travolta, Woody Harrelson, Adrian Brody, expectations were sky high. The problem? It came out just months after Saving Private Ryan. Audiences expecting another intense, blood-soaked war story instead got a meditative, philosophical exploration of life, nature, and humanity's place in both. Yes, there was combat, some of it brilliantly staged, but Malick was more interested in voiceovers, lingering shots of grass blowing in the wind, and the inner lives of his characters. Critics admired its ambition, but noted it was far from a conventional war film. The box office told a similar story. With a $52 million budget, it made about $98 million worldwide, which sounds okay until you factor in the marketing and the studio's hopes for a blockbuster. It wasn't the disaster of the decade, but it was still labeled a commercial letdown. Over time, its reputation has soared, with Martin Scorsese ranking it as one of the greatest films of the 90s. But in '98, it was the quiet, brooding cousin that got overshadowed by Spielberg's louder, bloodier masterpiece. Stalingrad 1993. Few war films capture pure, unrelenting hopelessness like Stalingrad. Made in Germany with a modest budget of around $10 million, it plunges you into the Eastern Front during one of the deadliest battles in human history. But instead of telling the story from the Allied perspective, it follows a group of German soldiers caught in the nightmare. They start with a sense of duty and end with frostbitten limbs, starvation, and desperation to escape the slaughter. Director Joseph Vilsmeier doesn't flinch. There's no sentimentality, no romanticized heroics, just the ugly truth of war grinding people into the dirt. The set design and location work are chilling, with snow, rubble, and smoke creating a suffocating atmosphere. As the men begin deserting, you're not just watching soldiers fight an enemy, you're watching them fight to survive their own command's orders. Despite its quality, Stalingrad barely broke even at the box office, earning about the same as it cost to make. Outside of Germany, distribution was limited, which didn't help its chances. Over the years, it's developed a cult following among war movie fans who appreciate its uncompromising realism. But in 1993, it was just another foreign war film that failed to make waves internationally. Sometimes the truth is too bleak for mainstream audiences. The 13th Warrior, 1999. What happens when you combine Vikings, war, horror, and a production nightmare? You get The 13th Warrior. Loosely based on Michael Crichton's novel Eaters of the Dead, the film stars Antonio Banderas as an exiled poet from Baghdad who ends up joining a band of Norse warriors against a mysterious, cannibalistic enemy. It should have been Braveheart, with a dash of Beowulf. Instead, it became one of the most expensive box office disasters of the 90s. The budget was somewhere between $85 and $160 million. No one seems to know for sure. Early test screenings were disastrous, so the studio brought in Crichton himself to rewrite and reshoot scenes. Meanwhile, original director John McTiernan was still fighting for his own cut. In the end, the studio went with Crichton's version, which pleased no one. The release date kept getting delayed, missing prime summer slots, and eventually the film was dumped in late August. When it finally limped into theaters, it earned just $61 million worldwide. Critics were unimpressed, audiences were confused, and the studio ate a massive loss. Over time, The 13th Warrior has found a niche fan base, especially among Viking enthusiasts, but its chaotic production left it doomed from the start. It's proof that even a killer concept can't survive behind-the-scenes warfare. Flags of Our Fathers, 2006. Clint Eastwood took a bold swing in 2006, directing two WWF epics back-to-back, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. The first told the story of the soldiers who raised the American flag on Iwo Jima, focusing on how that iconic image was used for propaganda back home. It's a fascinating angle. The battle ends, but the war for public perception is just beginning. Despite the weighty subject and Eastwood's reputation, Flags of Our Fathers struggled to find an audience. It earned critical praise for its performances and for humanizing the men behind the photograph. But the pacing and non-linear structure confused some viewers. Meanwhile, Letters from Iwo Jima, told from the Japanese perspective, stole the spotlight and critical buzz just months later. With a budget around $90 million, Flags of Our Fathers made only $65 million worldwide. For a prestige war film from a director at the top of his game, that was a disappointment. It remains an ambitious, layered work that dared to question the myths we build around war. But in 2006, audiences didn't line up for that conversation. Defiance 2008. Daniel Craig was still riding his James Bond resurgence when he took on Defiance, the true story of the Bielski Partisans, a group of Jewish brothers who rescued and sheltered over 1,000 refugees in the forests of Belarus during WW20. Directed by Edward Zwick, the film blends survival drama with gritty war action, showing how the group built an entire hidden community while evading Nazi forces. Craig delivers a steely, understated performance, while Liev Schreiber and Jamie Bell provide emotional firepower. The cinematography captures the bitter cold and relentless tension of living on the run. Critics generally liked it, praising its mix of action and moral complexity. But for a $50 million budget, its $51 million worldwide gross was barely a scrape above even, and that's before marketing costs. Part of the problem was timing. Released during the crowded 2008 awards season, it was overshadowed by flashier contenders. Still, Defiance has aged well as a portrait of resilience and leadership under impossible circumstances. It's a reminder that not all heroism happens on the front lines. Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk 2016. Ang Lee's Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk wasn't just a war movie. It was a technical experiment. Shot in 120 frames per second, 4K resolution, and 3D, it was meant to create hyperrealism, unlike anything audiences had seen. The story follows a young Iraq War soldier brought home for a victory tour, culminating in a surreal halftime show performance. On paper, it's about the disconnect between the reality of war and how it's packaged for public consumption. The cast included Joe Alwyn, Kristen Stewart, Garrett Hedlund, and Steve Martin. Early buzz focused on the groundbreaking tech, but there was a catch. Almost no theaters could actually project the film in its intended format. Most audiences saw it in standard projection, where the hyper-clear visuals just looked odd. Critics were divided, some calling it bold and intimate, others finding it cold and alienating. The box office collapse was staggering. With a $40 million budget, it grossed less than $31 million worldwide. The marketing didn't help. The trailers sold it as a traditional war drama, leaving audiences unprepared for the experimental pacing and unusual look. Today, it's mostly remembered as an ambitious misfire, proof that innovation alone can't win the battle for audience hearts. War movies are some of Hollywood's biggest gambles: high budgets, tricky politics, and the constant risk of missing the audience entirely. These 13 films prove that even the most ambitious projects can fall flat at the box office, whether it's because of bad timing, messy marketing, or simply being too far ahead of their time. Which of these do you think deserved a second shot? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe, and let's keep digging into the stories Hollywood didn't want you to remember.